Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Emory's Sister Finds Love. Chapter 1. Dear Pa and Ma. Well, can you believe that it's been 3 months since the wedding? It seems as though it was just yesterday, though of course I do miss you both. I guess life on a ranch is more full of chores and to-dos, and perhaps that's why the days are spinning by so quickly. Now that it's late summer, the twilight is coming on a little earlier, and I know that it will be autumn before I know it. It's comforting to know that the calendar keeps turning its pages, no matter where I am. Emory and Natalie are just as blissful today as they were as newlyweds. Natalie has taken Emory's little cottage in hand and fixed it up to be something special. The addition is finally complete and little and has a room of her own, with a bit of room for the family to grow in the future. Of course, and is a handful, I'm sure you remember, Ma, so I think they've got a full plate just trying to keep her occupied. Now that they're living over here at Flynn Ranch, sweet little Lena helps out a great deal, giving Natalie some time to herself and to take care of the house. Myself, I feel as though I'm settling in here very well. Now that I am a full-time resident of Pepper Gulch, everyone in town is getting to know me and to greet me by name, which makes my heart warm. Of course, I miss Tin City and our little house down the street from the school, but after all, Pepper Gulch is where I spent some of my childhood. So I suppose I should be just as at home here as I would be with you. I'm very grateful to have Emory and Natalie, and the Flynns as well. Natalie's brother often invites the whole group of us to visit them. Since they're 2 hours away, we can't go as often as we would like, but at least once a month it seems that we girls head down to South Meadows and spend a few days, while Mr. Flynn and Emory stay here and take care of the ranch. And I suspect that we will all get together for the holidays, when it comes time. Perhaps you too will be able to train out here and join us. I hope so. I hesitate to tell you this, but I suppose you can tell by what I've written. I don't intend to come back to Tin City, at least not for quite some time. Crystal has assured me that I'm welcome to stay here at the ranch as long as I like, and I've decided to seek out volunteer work in town, perhaps in the Sunday school, where Mrs. Ruth Hayes is looking for an assistant. The children of Pepper Gulch are both precocious and rambunctious. So Ann and Simon will fit right in, and Mandy's little one too, when he arrives, I imagine. I don't suppose that I will ever have any children of my own, but I am grateful for the chance to work with those who belong to other affectionate mothers and fathers. Please don't feel too sadly about my decision to stay in Pepper Gulch. I have thought over it long and hard, and I believe in my heart that it is the right thing for me to do. It would simply be too painful to come back to Tin City. Even if, you know who is no longer there, would think of him every time I walked past his mother's house, and every time I went to the general store, and every time I sat beside you in church, behind Mrs. Elwood and poor Gina. I've written a letter to Gina, incidentally, but have not heard back. I know Mrs. Elwood has been poorly. Please give her my regards and let me know how Gina is getting on. She is her mother's sole support, I suppose, since you know who has been gone. Gina is a dear and can't be held accountable for the actions of her dastardly older brother. I wish her well, and I still think of her as my sister. I will write again when I have some happenings to write about. The only news will be good news, of the birth of Mandy and Mr. York's child, and so I will send you a full report as soon as it happens. Your loving daughter, Almira. Almira set her pen down carefully, so as not to sprinkle ink on the page, and blotted the letter. Holding it up, she read over it once more, reading it aloud to herself in a murmur. Satisfied, she nodded once and reached for an envelope. You've told them of your decision, then? The young woman turned, already smiling, to face Daphne Flynn. The matron of the Flynn household, Daphne had quickly become something of a second mother to the newest addition to the ranch, and Almira was grateful for the older woman's loving concern. Yes, I did. I've been putting it off for 2 letters now, and that's not fair to Ma and Pa. They've been waiting to pick me up at the coach station for 2 months now. Daphne nodded sagely and sat down next to the girl at the kitchen table. I think you did exactly right, she said. You tried to spare their feelings for as long as you could, but it isn't really about them, at all. No one could expect you to simply carry on your life back in Tin City, not after what you know who did to you. Almira couldn't help but chuckle. I guess we all call him that, now. Well, Emory has been known to say the man's name out loud, but there's usually some sort of description attached to it that wouldn't be fitting for a respectable woman to pronounce. Daphne's eyes twinkled. For all I know, that man's real name actually is, that blasted John Elwood. Almira chuckled again, but she winced along with it. I suppose I should let it go, after this long. It shouldn't hurt so much to think of it. Oh, my dear. Daphne put her hand on Almira's. It hasn't been that long, only just shy of 5 months, hasn't it? And you were in love with him. Love carves the biggest wounds of all, and that's the tragic fact. You're so young, too, you've hardly had a chance to get toughened up yet. Well, I'm tougher now, said Almira with determination, wiping briefly at her eyes. And I'm not in love with him anymore. He put an end to that. Yes, dear. Daphne patted her hand. Just so long as you don't let the actions of one man interfere with your life forever. Don't let him stand in the way of you loving again. Almira sighed. I don't know, Daphne, if love is so painful, why do people seek it out so? I know that Emory and Natalie are happy now, together, but they both went through so much pain beforehand. Well, Almira, you look at those two at the dinner table tonight and tell me whether all the pain wasn't worth it. My land, they've positively got stars in their eyes when they look at each other. Daphne chuckled and shook her head. You'd think there was no one else on earth but the two of them. I know, but that can't happen for everyone. It was some sort of miracle that it happened for them. Dear, you're surrounded by stories of love triumphing over pain. Emory and Natalie, Colin and Mandy, my Ernest and his dear Crystal, all of them have come through pain of one sort or another, and none of them would trade the happiness they have now for what they had before. You're only 18, dear one, don't be so quick to give up. She chucked Almira gently under the chin. Promise? Almira sighed deeply and nodded. I promise. She smiled at Daphne as the older woman left, and then she continued about her business with the letter. But as she addressed the envelope to her parents in Tin City, Colorado, she was conscious of a niggling little doubt. Love had triumphed all around her, it was true, but that was no guarantee. What surety did she have that the same would be true for herself? Chapter 2. Levi James entered the barn, whistling, and was surprised to find his new boss mucking out the stalls. He stopped and stared at Colin York, raising his eyebrows. Well, golly, Mr. York. What are you up to? Don't you have ranch hands to do that sort of thing for you? Colin straightened up and grinned at him, wiping the back of his hand across his forehead. Matter of fact, I do. Just hired on a new one a few months ago, and he's working out pretty well, apart from mucking out the stables. Levi grinned back, sheepishly. It's on my list for tomorrow, he said. I'm just about to head off to Pepper Gulch. Taking my afternoon off today. Don't worry about it, Levi. It's good for me to get out and do some work once in a while, can't spend all day keeping track of paperwork, after all. Levi nodded, still feeling a little guilty, and moved past him to reach for the tack belonging to his own horse. I guess you might miss it, at that. I know the ranch belonged to your grandfather, you probably grew up mucking out stalls and working with horses. Not exactly. I came out from West Virginia not 2 years ago, when my grandfather died, and we inherited the place. Colin leaned on his pitchfork, smiling reminiscently. That's when Mandy and I met, as a matter of fact, seems like it was just yesterday. He glanced up at Levi. I guess it hasn't all been smooth sailing since then. But now that we've got honest men like Andrew and you working with us, it's already getting better. I'm sure grateful you were willing to take me on, Mr. York, said Levi, saddling his horse Oaks. I've been looking for a place for several months now, ever since old Mr. Montrose up and sold his farm. Indeed. Colin nodded, watching Levi speculatively. You came very highly recommended by Andrew, Levi. He said he's known you since you were a boy, and you've always been a hard worker. Andrew's a good man. You're smart to trust him. Levi grinned. I did wonder, though, why you wanted to move so far away from your hometown in Wyoming. I mean, I understand it with Andrew, he's a foreman, and he can pick and choose where he goes, looking for work that suits him. But I won't pretend that what I'm offering you as a ranch hand is any great shakes. Oh, I'm glad to have you, he said quickly, holding out a hand. But, I just wonder. Andrew's a good man, as you said, and he won't tell tales out of school. Colin scratched his head. I guess I just want to make sure whether I've gotten myself into anything I should know about. We've had a few bad apples working for us here on the ranch in the past. Not that I expect anything like that of you, but forewarned is forearmed. Levi smoothed a hand over Oak's glossy chestnut neck and shook his head. I've never been in any trouble, Mr. York. Andrew would have told you if I had. His eyes took on a faraway look. I've just suffered tragedy and loss, I guess. And I couldn't stand it there in Wyoming a minute longer. Then I heard from Andrew that I was invited to come out here to South Meadows and work on the ranch he had taken up managing. He glanced swiftly over at his new boss. And I jumped on that like a duck on a June bug, I'll tell you that much. Colin opened his mouth as though to say something else, or ask another question, but then seemed to think better about it. He closed his mouth again and nodded. Right, he said. Well, listen, Levi. If you ever need to talk, you're welcome to come to me. I know a little bit about tragedy and loss. Levi hesitated, and then nodded. I'll remember that, Mr. York. Thank you. He swung himself up in the saddle and tipped his hat to Colin. Have a good afternoon and evening, Mr. York. Give my regards to Mrs. York. I will, at that. Hey, Mandy says you should come into the house for supper one of these nights. Be glad to. Levi kicked at Oaks gently and cantered off out of the property. Pepper Gulch was 2 hours away by cart, but he knew from experience that he could make it in just under an hour, if he ran Oaks at full speed part of the way. And Oaks didn't mind, the gelding was anxious to get moving, and Levi let him have his head as soon as they were away from the ranch and on the main road heading north. South Meadows, the closest settlement to York Ranch, didn't have much to recommend it. Whenever anyone at the York Ranch talked about going into town, it was always Pepper Gulch to which they referred. There was the general store, the post office, the hotel, the saloon, and besides all that, there was the fact that Flynn Ranch housed Crystal Flynn, née Chambers, Mandy's younger sister, and Natalie Spencer, née York, Colin's younger sister. The extended family enjoyed a close and loving relationship, and they never let a little matter like a 2-hour distance get in their way. Just about every week, it seemed, Mandy and Colin were visiting Pepper Gulch, or Daphne Flynn, Crystal, Natalie, Almira, and all the children were coming in a loud, happy crew to visit South Meadows. Levi couldn't help but smile at the very thought of them. It was a joyful throng, to be sure, and he was always glad to see them, though he didn't know them well. He didn't know much of anyone well here in Utah, but he was working on it. He'd moved here to start a new life, after all, leaving his tragedy behind. Besides the Yorks, Flynns, and Spencers, and in addition to Andrew and his wife, Levi had struck up a friendship with the deputy sheriff of Pepper Gulch, Riley Johnson. Deputy Johnson was new on the job, and the same age as Levi. When Levi had first arrived in Pepper Gulch, prior to heading out to his new station at York Ranch, there had been a bit of a mix-up over his resemblance to an old friend of the sheriff. Explanations had been made, they had both had a good laugh over it, and the two had been friends ever since. Levi usually spent his afternoon off in Pepper Gulch, visiting the saloon in the company of the good sheriff. He had already become a familiar face, and was quickly hailed by Robert, the barman, as he entered the establishment. Hey there. Well, hello, Robert. The barman polished a glass and then held it up to the light to inspect it. Deputy Johnson's over there behind the piano. Levi squinted in the direction of the dark corner. What did he do, get in trouble? Guess the preacher's wife said something to him about someone seeing him in here every week, and now he's feeling a little self-conscious. Levi laughed and went to join his friend in the corner. Riley Johnson was a tow-headed young man of 28, a bit on the slight side. Not at all what Levi ever would have expected from a Wild West sheriff, but he got the job done, as Levi had had the opportunity to see more than once. Levi. Riley. I hear you got an earful from the preacher's wife. Oh, boy, you're not far off there. Riley put his face in both hands and shook his head. Mrs. Hayes is the sweetest person on earth, until you get to know her. Levi chuckled. She's a strong woman, and no mistake. No wonder Mr. Hayes always looks so scared. When I first got here, I thought he was afraid of his own sermons on hellfire, but then I met his wife, and I realized the truth. She's a good soul, though, said Riley mournfully. I can't start out my job by alienating the preacher's wife. Of course not. Riley shook his head again and sighed. Anyhow, I think I've escaped notice for the time being. Levi scanned the saloon. It was only early afternoon, but it was obvious that a few of the denizens of the establishment had already been drinking for a while. Robert, he knew, did his best to cut people off before they were too far gone, and the presence of the deputy sheriff should add a little extra caution to the drinkers. Though he was new to the area, however, he had already learned to recognize a few locals who simply didn't take no for an answer. A few of them were there that day, and he tucked the knowledge away, just in case. How have things been here in Pepper Gulch? Quiet? Riley took a gulp from his glass and nodded. Just about like usual. How are things in South Meadows? Oh, nothing ever happens in South Meadows. Only been there 2 months, but I already know that. What about back home in Wyoming? You ever hear from anyone there? Levi did his best to keep his face unexpressive, but evidently it did not work. His friend leaned forward and scrutinized his expression, looking concerned. What's wrong, Levi? Oh. Levi shook his head. I guess I've been trying to avoid thinking about Wyoming all day. But Mr. York asked me about it just before I came here today, and now you, too. Well, golly, I'm sorry, Levi. I didn't mean to bring up a painful subject. It was clear from Riley's puzzled glance that he didn't understand what Levi was upset about. And Levi couldn't blame him. You weren't to know, he said. How could you know? I haven't told anyone. I guess Andrew and Melissa know, but that's it. Well, hey, if you don't want to talk about it. Levi heaved a sigh. I feel like I should, he said. Maybe not to everyone, but to you. I feel like we've been friends for a long time, Riley. You can keep a secret, can't you? Sure. It's not much of a secret. I don't want to talk about it. Don't even want to think about it. I don't want everyone to know, and feel sorry for me. He stared downward into the golden depths of his drink. That's why I moved out here, 'cause everyone back home all felt sorry for me, and I couldn't take it anymore. What is it? Asked Riley softly. A few years before I came out here, I was engaged to be married. Levi's eyes were far away, fixed on nothing. A sweet girl, we'd known each other since we were kids. We'd been courting for about 3 months, and I knew that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with Diana. My ma was over the moon, I'll tell you that. We were a good match, the two of us. What happened? Well, long about 2 weeks before we were to get married, there was a raid on the neighboring farm. Bandits, outlaws, never did find out which gang it was. They weren't too keen on advertising after what happened. Neighbors chased them off, and they rode through Diana's parents' place, still in a shootout. Diana ran to protect her little sister, and a bullet hit her. He dropped his head, closing his eyes tightly. She lasted a few hours but slipped away just a moment before I got there. I never got to say goodbye. The two were quiet for a moment, and then Riley said, "That's enough to turn a man's mind," something like that. The injustice of it all, that's why I decided to take to the law. Try to do my best to keep things like that from happening, lock up the outlaws before they get a chance to take innocent lives like hers. It's coming up on 3 years since it happened, Levi told him. I made it there at home for a while, tried to keep myself busy. But I got sick of being treated like an invalid. I took a job at Old Montrose's about 5 miles away, hoping to escape it, but it seemed to follow me around everywhere. He looked up at his friend. I just knew that it didn't matter where I went there in Wyoming. I had to get away. Luckily, Andrew and his wife came out here to work, and he recommended me. It's quite a story. You can see why I don't want too many to know about it. I can, at that. Something like that does have a way of following you around. Riley tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. I guess that answers a question I was asked the other day by George Soames' little sister. What question is that? Whether you were interested in courting. Levi's heart gave a little jolt. He hesitated, and then shook his head. Not now, he said. Maybe not ever. But you want to get past it. I do, but I don't know. It's complicated. I feel as though if I'd had a chance to say goodbye, things would be different. What do you think Diana would want you to do? Riley asked gently. Levi took a deep drink of his ale. She would want me to be happy, he said. She was generous and kind, not a mean or jealous bone in her body. She would want me to be happy, whatever that meant. Well, then, said Riley, draining the last of his beer and waving to Robert for another. I guess you can just take your time and figure that out. Chapter 3. Mrs. Ruth Hayes, as the wife of the local pastor, was every bit as prim and proper as should be expected. But that didn't certainly make her any easier for Almira to talk with. She was grateful that Daphne, Crystal, Natalie, and Lena were there along with her. Her idea to speak to the pastor's wife about the possibility of working with her during Sunday school, to help with the children, had turned into a commanding invitation to come for tea that afternoon, not the sort of invitation that could be turned down, either. Besides, said Natalie, Almira's forthright sister-in-law, if you want a position, you've got to butter her up a bit. Well, here they were, and Almira wasn't sure that buttering Mrs. Hayes up was possible. She had looked Almira over with an air of a horse trader examining a potential purchase, had given only a brief mention to the vacancy at the Sunday school, and was now moving on to her pet project, the upcoming fall play, which she put on every year. To stunning reactions, of course, she said, if I do say so myself. Stunning or stunned, murmured Natalie, just loud enough for Almira to hear. With an effort, Almira suppressed a giggle. Of course, the trouble is that our pianist, Miss Marie, has gone off to be a lady's companion to some wealthy socialite back in Boston. Mrs. Hayes shook her head as though this were the most tragic thing she could imagine. Dear, dear. Whatever could she have been thinking of? And, of course, that leaves us facing the grim reality of an empty piano stool. Of course, said Almira, before she could stop herself, and received a swift jab in the ribs from her sister-in-law's elbows for her lack of self-control. Lena, usually quite quiet and subdued, allowed a giggle of her own to escape. Even worse, Natalie followed it up with, why, Almira plays the piano, don't you, Almira? She glanced over at Natalie, frantically. All three of the women nodded encouragingly at her. Yes, I do, actually. Realizing that this might be one way of buttering up Mrs. Hayes, she added, I used to play for the church at home, sometimes. At weddings, and so forth. Mrs. Hayes gave her another coolly appraising glance. Really, she said. Of course, I would have to be assured that your skills were up to our standards beforehand, of course. Almira managed not to automatically reply, of course, but only just. Instead, she nodded and said, indeed. Said Mrs. Hayes. But Almira could tell that her hemming and hawing was only a tactic. Mrs. Hayes must not have had any other options here in Pepper Gulch, or she certainly wouldn't have brought it up to their little group. Apart from Daphne, every single one of them was a newcomer. And newcomers, while welcomed in Pepper Gulch, were still not exactly treated as locals, or given trusted assignments, which, Almira knew, the position of pianist for the stunning, yearly play most certainly must be. If she wanted to teach at Sunday school, however, she had to start somewhere. And proving herself to Mrs. Hayes with the piano was as good a place as any. Afterward, as they said their goodbyes and made their way out through the little white garden gate, Natalie exploded into laughter, quickly joined by the rest of them. I'm starting to realize why you haven't suggested that we visit the Hayes home before now, Daphne. Is she always like that? Of course, said Daphne, with an exaggerated shrug. This brought a fresh wave of laughter, and on the crest of it they made their way back toward the main part of town. Visiting the preacher's wife was only one of their aims while in Pepper Gulch. Daphne and Natalie were both in need of the dressmaker's shop. Crystal had to pick up some items for little Simon at the general store, and Almira excused herself. I'll just run over and take my letter to the post office, she said. I'm anxious to get it sent off to Ma and Pa before I lose my nerve. Are you sure you don't want one of us to go with you? Natalie asked, voice filled with concern. Almira smiled at her. I know the way, she said. Thank you, though. I won't be but a few moments, and then I'll catch up with you at the dressmaker's. Well, all right, but watch out for any rambunctious men around the saloon. It's Saturday afternoon, after all. I'll be careful. She parted from her companions and headed for the post office. It was a few blocks away from the rest of town, and she did in fact have to pass by the saloon, but it wasn't that late yet, after all, she reasoned. Surely no one would be drinking too much already. Reassuring herself, she slipped past the saloon with a sideways glance and into the post office, setting off the little bell above the door. George Soames glanced up at her and gave her a vague smile. Hello, Miss Spencer. Hello, George. You look bored, I've brought you something to do. She handed him the letter, and he took it with a nod, glancing at the address and putting it in the appropriate mail bag. Now, hold on, don't rush off, I've got something for you, too. Really? He handed over an envelope. Sure enough, her name was on it, and she recognized the handwriting. Oh, Gina has written me back at last. Is that who you've been waiting for? Yes, a good friend of mine, almost like a sister, really. Back in Tin City, Colorado. I've sent her several letters, but she hasn't written back before now. I sure hope everything's all right, Miss Almira. Thank you, George. She nodded a goodbye to him and left the post office, tearing into the envelope as she went. The letter was only one sheet long, and she scanned it quickly, walking but scarcely paying any attention to where she was going. A soft exclamation escaped from her lips and she began to read it through again. Why, what's the matter, little lady? At the sound of the strange, slightly hazy voice, she glanced up, blinking in confusion. She found herself standing just on the other side of the saloon door, with two men immediately in front of her. It was obvious that they had just emerged from the saloon, both because the door was still swinging, and because she could smell the liquor on their breath. Oh, nothing. Nothing at all. Excuse me. She made to hurry around them, but the larger one sidestepped her and corralled her back in. Now, we hate to see a pretty girl like you upset, drawled the other one. Surely there must be something we can do to help you. To make you feel better, said the big one. He grinned. Take your mind off your troubles. Matter of fact, maybe you should accompany us back into the saloon, sit down, tell us all about it. His shorter friend glanced up at him. I bet Robert would let us have another round if we brought a pretty girl like this in to dress the place up a little. I bet you're right. The tall one reached out and took Almira's arm. She twisted it away from him with a yelp of dismay, but he only took hold of it again, more firmly this time. Let go of me. Come on, girlie, we'll buy you a drink. Let go. You heard her. This voice, too, was unknown, but the face that it belonged to was familiar, she realized with a jolt. He worked on the York's ranch, Levi, she thought his name was. He was new, she'd only seen him once or twice. He was nearly as tall as the man who had hold of her arm, but not anywhere near as burly. Nevertheless, he appeared quite ready to take on both of them. He had obviously been in the process of leaving the saloon. His horse stood saddled and ready behind him. She realized he must have stopped and come back when he heard her cry, and a surge of gratitude ran through her heart. What was that, stranger? Said the tall man. I said, you heard the lady, said Levi calmly. She told you to let her go. You'd best do so, or we'll have to call the sheriff. Sheriff, sneered the man. He's out of town. You want to call that little deputy? Be my guest. I'll take him with one hand tied behind my back. You'd best not disrespect the law, said Levi. I may be new around here, but I know that Pepper Gulch is a peaceful town, and people like it that way. I don't want some stranger telling me about my town, said the shorter man, nastily. Keep your mouth shut and mind your business. Let her go and step away. Take your own advice. The taller man finally let go of Almira's arm, and it was evident that he was tired of this conversation. With a grunt, he stepped forward and swung at Levi's head. Levi ducked swiftly and landed a solid punch in the bigger man's gut. He followed it up with another, but the shorter man pressed the advantage while Levi was distracted. Look out! Almira shouted, but it was a split second too late. The shorter man smacked Levi cleanly across the chin, turning his head so swiftly that she heard a click, and the gallant ranch hand went down in the dirt. Finally, others in the town were realizing that there was another brawl outside the saloon and were rushing forward to pull them all apart. The two drunks swore and stepped forward to kick Levi while he was down. Almira gave a shriek and pummeled the taller man in the back, hardly aware at all of what she was doing. From the far end of the street came a gunshot, a warning shot, fired into the air. The law was coming. The drunks scattered and disappeared, and Almira fell onto her knees beside her fallen savior. His eyes fluttered open, eyes of a clear, bright, hazel green, rimmed with thick black lashes. He looked up at her, and despite the rapid swelling and bruising of his chin and mouth, she saw him start to smile. I know you. Shoo, she told him, unsure of what to do. Don't try to speak. They hit you hard. Just a scratch, murmured Levi. The deputy rushed up to them, holstering his pistol, and bent over them, brow furrowed with concern. Levi, are you all right? Fine. He isn't fine, said Almira. He's been struck on the jaw. She stepped back as Deputy Johnson reached down. Levi took his hand and with his help made it to a standing position, though he looked as though he were dazed. Oh, please be careful. Deputy Johnson scrutinized Levi's face, checking his eyes. The doc is out helping at the Hillards. Sookie's got a fever. You'd better come back to the office and sit for a while, make sure that you're all right. Fine, honest, said Levi again, but he didn't resist as Deputy Johnson took him by the arm and led him back down the street toward the sheriff's office. Good thing I wasn't too far away from the saloon, he said, conversationally, to Almira. Who knows how long it might have taken before I heard the hubbub, otherwise. You'd better come along with me, miss. Oh, Deputy Johnson, will he be all right? He'll be fine, apart from some bruising, I reckon. Come along, miss, and tell me what happened. He waved a hand at the others who had gathered around them. You all can go on home. Nothing else to see here. Almira fell in obediently beside him, glancing up at Levi. The ranch hand seemed to still be recovering himself. When he stumbled in his step, she reached out automatically and looped her arm through his, offering him her support. He glanced down at her in some surprise but did not step away or push her from him. Instead, the two of them continued down the street, arms linked as though they were old friends. Ahead of them, not too far from the sheriff's office, Almira saw the door to the dressmaker's open and Natalie emerge, craning her neck to look for Almira to one side and then the other. Almira waved at her swiftly, then returned her free hand to Levi's arm to offer him added support. Natalie. Oh, my goodness. Almira, what's happened? Levi turned his head and looked down at her. His face was swelling rapidly and already turning purple. Almira, he murmured. I was right, I do know you. Yes, we've met at the York Ranch. Thought so. You'd better hush now, it must hurt terribly to talk. She patted him on the arm and steered him into the sheriff's office in the wake of Deputy Johnson. It wasn't long before Natalie, Daphne, and Crystal rushed in, all exclaiming and talking over each other. They found Almira sitting next to Levi in the cell. What on earth? It was the only place he could lie down, Almira explained, gesturing to the cot. She was holding a warm compress to Levi's face. His eyes were closed. Is that Levi James? Said Natalie. He works for my brother. What's he doing here? What happened? Almira explained as plainly as she could, though her voice still shook somewhat in the wake of all the fear and excitement. Crystal exclaimed in sympathy. Daphne sat down next to Almira and put an arm around her, and Natalie shook her fist in the air. Why, if I could get my hands on those two. Now, Mrs. Spencer, said Deputy Johnson, standing up from behind his desk and coming toward them. I've taken a report from Miss Almira, and we'll bring the two in. They didn't mean any serious harm, but they're in the habit of drinking a little too much, so we'll bring them in and let them make reparations. I should certainly hope so. Natalie bristled. They should spend a year in jail. That might be taking it a bit too far, said Deputy Johnson, but I'll pass your recommendation on to the judge. Poor girl, are you all right? Daphne whispered to Almira. Almira was looking at Levi. His hazel eyes had opened once more, and he was looking back at her. The fuzziness that she had noticed earlier, right after he'd been hit, was clearing, and his expression was direct and sharp and clear. Her throat suddenly felt very dry. She swallowed. Yes, she said, thanks to Mr. James, here, I'm all right. He finally seemed to have taken her advice and stopped speaking. But as their eyes met and their gazes held, she had the strangest sensation that she had never had such deep and complicated communication. Chapter 4. As they drove away from Pepper Gulch, Almira was still deep in thought. So deep in thought, in fact, that it took a gentle jostle from Natalie to make her realize she was being spoken to. Oh, goodness, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, said Natalie, putting an arm around her. You're still in shock, of course. We shouldn't be asking you questions. No, it isn't that, exactly. She opened her mouth to try and explain, and then thought better of it. How could she tell them she was immersed in the memory of Levi James coming to her rescue, and the unusual clarity of his hazel green eyes? She couldn't, she decided. She would sound ridiculous. I knew we shouldn't have let you go on your own, said Natalie. Well, it was only to the post office, pointed out Crystal. We all thought she would be perfectly safe. The post office. Almira sat up straight and reached into her pocket. Goodness me, in all the excitement I plumb forgot. I got a letter from Gina, at last. Gina? Asked Crystal, but Natalie gave her a sharp glance to warn her to be quiet. A friend from Colorado, she explained on Almira's behalf. It's all right, Natalie, Almira intervened, I don't mind telling her. Gina is the younger sister of my former husband-to-be. Gina Elwood. She and I became close friends after Pa and Mom moved me to Tin City. It was Gina who introduced me to John. I'll bet she regrets it now, commented Natalie. Oh, she wasn't to know. He was her older brother, and she worshipped him, and you and I both know what that's like. It's just that your brother and Emory are good, upstanding men, and John, well, he wasn't. She shook her head. But that's beside the point. Poor Gina, her mother has been ill for a long time and had recently gotten worse when I left Tin City. About 3 weeks ago, she finally passed away. Oh, poor dear, said Daphne, with feeling. I can't imagine how she must feel. Almira pressed a hand to her forehead. She's all alone now, apart from John, and something must be going on, though she wouldn't tell me what. She only said that she is coming for a visit because she must get away. She turned to Natalie swiftly. She must be on her way by now, what can I do? Natalie turned to Crystal, whose sweet face was full of sympathy. The poor girl, it's a terrible thing to lose your parents, and my heart goes out to her. Mandy and I know what that feels like, and so do Natalie and Colin. I wish she could simply stay with us for as long as she likes, but, she hesitated. I'm afraid with Simon getting older, he'll need his own room before long, and I can't in good conscience offer her the broom cupboard that is the only other unoccupied space in the house. She reached back and patted Almira on the shoulder. "But we'll put her up in Simon's room for now, until we sort something out. She won't be left without a roof over her head, never you fear, and of course, we'll welcome her as a friend of the family." "Thank you," murmured Almira gratefully. Natalie tightened her arm around her shoulder. "We'll think of something," she said. "Just you concentrate on resting up and regaining your strength. It's been a terribly trying day for you. Can we send a message to York Ranch and ask after poor Mr. James?" Almira asked hesitantly. "I feel terrible that he's been involved in this and hurt besides. And he's new here, just like me. I'm 100% certain that we'll hear from Colin before 2 days go by," declared Natalie. "My brother will want to ensure that you're all right, for one thing. And besides that, Mandy is getting close to her time, so I reckon we'll be hearing some happy news soon." She sat up straight as a thought evidently struck her. "Almira, that could be the solution to the problem. Mandy will need help with the baby, and Colin is so busy with the ranch that he won't be able to spare any extra time. But Amy is surely expecting to be hired on to help out," pointed out Daphne. Natalie shook her head. "Amy's expecting herself, again. Besides, with 3 children at home already and her poor husband sickly, Amy's got her hands full. No, I'm sure Mandy and Colin will be delighted to have a girl like Gina available to help. And there's plenty of room at the ranch in South Meadows." She smiled confidently, having settled the issue entirely in her own mind. Almira wasn't quite as certain as her sister-in-law, but the very idea that there was a possible solution made her feel much better. She was able to put aside the worry about poor Gina, return the letter to her pocket, and fall right back into thinking of Levi James. The rest of the evening was as full of much ado as she would have expected, with everyone fussing around her and ensuring that she was as comfortable and secure as possible. Her older brother, in particular, was clearly upset over the story that his wife told him in low tones. As they all gathered in the ranch house for supper, he came to Almira and put his arms around her, holding her tightly. She hugged him back. "I'm glad that nothing worse happened," he murmured. "I'm all right," she reassured him, and stepped back, smiling up at him. "Mr. James saved me." "Yes, I heard." He nodded, his face relaxing a little as he looked her over and ascertained for himself that she was, indeed, all right. "We all owe him a debt of gratitude." "Yes, I hope I can thank him in person again very soon." "I'm sure that can be arranged." She felt her heart flutter in her chest at the very thought and decided that she needed to give herself a stern talking to. What was all this? She'd met Levi James a few times before, though they had never spoken much, and she hadn't thought much about him. Was this just hero worship, gratitude for his help? Or was it something more? Almira was no stranger to love. John Elwood had stolen her young heart, and then crushed it beneath his heel, running off with another woman just 2 weeks after he asked Almira to marry him. Ever since, she had been convinced that love was a gift that was meant for other people, deserving, worthy people, like her brother and Natalie. She couldn't let herself get carried away by something that might just be a reaction to the man who had shielded her from danger and fear. She decided, instead, to focus her attention on the upcoming arrival of her friend. Poor Gina evidently had more to her story, she was sure of it, though exactly what else remained to be seen. It wouldn't be long before Gina arrived, and Almira would see with her own eyes that the young woman who once was meant to be her sister-in-law was recovering from the tragedy of her mother's loss. In the meantime, she had to practice the piano for the upcoming play. She was still shocked that the cantankerous preacher's wife had actually agreed to her help. In all the excitement, she had nearly forgotten about it. She threw herself into conversation with her family and friends, chatting animatedly about the upcoming events. Before long, Levi James was a distant thought, sidling quietly to the back of her mind, but always present. By the time Gina arrived just over a week later, the trauma of the events that day had subsided, and Almira was back to her usual sunny self. As Gina alighted from the stagecoach, Almira rushed forward to embrace her. The two friends hugged each other enthusiastically, and Almira was shocked to see that Gina was near tears once she drew back. Gina waved a hand at her, dismissing her questions. "Please, I promise I'll tell you all very soon." But I've cried too much over the last few weeks, and I can't stand to break down again. Tell me about you, instead." Understanding her friend's emotions, Almira did just that, telling her all about her new life here in Pepper Gulch on the Flynn Ranch. Gina listened, managing to smile, and asking questions now and then. Almira scrutinized her friend's face. Gina looked thinner than she remembered, rather pale for the end of the summer season. The two couldn't be more different in appearance. Where Almira was slim and dark, Gina had always been round and rosy and golden, with curly blonde hair and wide blue eyes. They were nearly of the same height, though, and Almira could see clearly that Gina had begun to slim down herself, almost as though she had not been eating. "We'll get you home and give you some tea and toast," she said, finishing up her litany of the changes that had happened recently. "You must be famished and exhausted after the long trip." "I am rather tired," Gina admitted. "It will be good to rest at last." Wisely, Almira decided not to push her friend to tell her story. Once they arrived at the ranch, it was easy to let Crystal, Daphne, and Natalie take over the conversation, and the ranch house resounded with laughter and good-natured teasing between the women, who were all good friends as well as being family. At long last, after an early supper and introductions to the men as they came in from working, Almira could tell that Gina had reached the end of her strength. Kindly, she took her friend upstairs to put her to bed in the room that would soon belong to little Simon. "I'm just down the hall," she said reassuringly. "If you need anything in the night, please don't hesitate to come to me." "Will you sit with me a moment?" asked Gina timidly. I want to tell you what's happened." She sighed. "I want to get it over with. I can't stand to think about putting it off until tomorrow." "Of course, dear." They sat together on the edge of the bed, and Almira reached for her friend's hand, holding it comfortingly. Gina sighed again. "Mother was sick for so long," she said. "The truth is that we used all of our money to try and help her. That is, what little we had left after Father died, which wasn't much. I took in some mending, but I couldn't work much because Mother needed my help. And of course, John was gone. He only came back once or twice after he hurt you as he did. I want to say that he was ashamed to show himself, but I'm afraid that he just didn't care very much." She closed her eyes and shook her head. "I'm ashamed for him. What he did was his own decision," said Almira quietly. "I've made my peace with it, I think. Don't let him hurt either of us anymore. I wish it were that simple. After Mother passed away, I wrote to him. He came at once, not to pay his respects, but to take over the house. The house, and everything in it. He had to sell some of the things to pay off our debts, but he was going to keep the house, he said. His wife would come and join him once he was ready." She darted a swift glance at Almira, apologetically, as though afraid that the very mention of her brother's wife would cause pain. It did, a little, just a sting, like that of a nettle. Almira shook it off immediately. "And he said that I could not stay there. I told him I had nowhere else to go, and he said that he would take care of that for me." She wiped a tear away from her eyes. "It wasn't 3 days later that he told me he had arranged a marriage for me to a man who worked with him at the factory, one of the managers, I suppose, for he was more well-to-do than we are. I don't think John thought of my feelings at all, even though he said he was doing it for me." "I doubt it," said Almira stoutly. "If anything, he likely thought it would be advantageous for him to be related to a manager in the factory. Perhaps he thought your husband-to-be would lend him money or see to it that debts were paid without taking anything from John's pockets." She shook her head. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to be spiteful." "I don't think you are being spiteful. I think you know him better than many of us ever did." The two lapsed into silence for a moment, each taking comfort from the presence of the other. "That was when I wrote to you," said Gina. "It took me a few days, but I arranged for my trip here with the last little bit of money I had saved. Just enough. I'm sorry not to give you more warning, but I was afraid that somehow John would trap me into doing what he wanted. He's already sold almost everything in the house, and things seem to be moving so quickly, I had nowhere else to go. Except, I spoke with your mother," she said hesitantly. "She gave me a little money for the journey, as well. She suggested that I come to you. She said I could stay with them, but she was afraid it wasn't far enough out of John's reach." Almira's heart warmed at the thought of her dear mother, doing her best to help out an old friend. Though the Spencers had never approved of John Elwood, they'd had no quarrel with his mother or his sister. "I'm glad of it," she said, squeezing Gina's hand. "And things are going to be much better from now on, you'll see. I believe we even may have a position for you with Crystal's sister Mandy and her husband. It's a few hours from here, but we would still see each other most every week, at least." "Oh, Almira, that would be wonderful." Almira smiled and pulled her friend into a hug. "Now, get some rest, and everything will be brighter in the morning. We'll wait a few days for you to get your strength back. No one would want to get back on a cart for 2 hours after just completing a journey of several days. And then we'll all go over to York Ranch in South Meadows and make introductions all around." "Thank you, Almira." Almira patted her on the shoulder and stood up, moving toward the door. "Sleep well, sweet friend." She closed the door gently behind her and turned toward the stairs, taking in a deep breath. The story of John's cruelty was no surprise. She had seen firsthand just how cruelly he could behave, after all. But her heart went out to her friend, reeling from the loss of her mother and then facing the selfishness and disdain of her only other family member. Well, Gina was here now, at Flynn Ranch, and she was in good hands. And in a few days, they would go to South Meadows and introduce her to Colin and Mandy, and, she thought with another little flutter of her heart, Levi James. Chapter 5. Levi straightened up with a groan. "Here, now," said his boss, concern evident in his voice. "Should you be doing this already? I told you to take a week off from work." Levi shook his head. "I'm fine, Mr. York, just a little sore still from where I hit the ground, I guess." He grinned ruefully. "And that part was my own fault." "I hardly see how you could have had any say in it," said Colin York. "You didn't ask the man to hit you." "No, but I shouldn't have gotten distracted. If I had remembered to keep my guard up against both of them, I wouldn't have gotten hit at all." He shook his head and bent over again to lift the fence railing into place. "Oh, well. You're surely not sorry that you stepped forward to help Miss Almira, are you?" Levi's heart gave a definite jump at the mention of her name. For a moment, that lovely, dark-eyed face floated in front of him. "Mr. York," he said frankly, "if I knew that it was going to kill me, I'd do it all over again." Colin laughed. "That's what I like to hear," he said. "You did a noble and brave thing, and we're all grateful for it. Why, Almira's one of the sweetest girls on earth, and she didn't deserve anyone to speak to her like they did. I guess Deputy Johnson is still working on tracking the two down." "Oh, I'd be happy to help him bring them in," said Levi grimly. "I reckon I'd know them if I saw them again. It's lucky for them that it was a stranger who confronted them, otherwise they would have been brought in already." This time, both of them bent to lift the rail, and it greatly eased the strain on Levi's back and side. He knew that the bruising on his face had yellowed and was nearly faded away, but the soreness in his body still seemed to be lingering. Maybe he was getting old. "Mr. York," he said tentatively, "have you heard from Flynn Ranch lately? How is Miss Almira getting on?" Even just saying her name felt almost illicit. He couldn't understand it. He'd met Almira, sure, and she was a pretty girl. But there was something about the encounter in Pepper Gulch that had made him look at her differently. When he'd opened his eyes, lying there on the ground, it was to find her hovering over him, worried, but beautiful. An angel of God, watching over him. Ever since then, he'd found himself thinking of her first thing in the morning and praying to dream of her at night. It was ridiculous, he told himself. It was only because of the circumstances, and because she had cared for him so tenderly in those moments after he'd been hit. It was foolish to let himself get carried away with something like that, especially when he had long ago promised himself never to let himself be drawn to a woman again. There was just too much pain involved. Still, despite all that, he found himself waiting on tenterhooks for Colin York to answer him. "Had a message from Emory the other day, as a matter of fact," said Colin thoughtfully. "Don't worry yourself, Levi, Almira is doing just fine. For such a slight thing, she's resilient. Strong. Just like her brother, and just like women are made to be, out here in Utah." He grinned. Maybe all women are like that, everywhere, and I just never realized it until I met this lot. Your sister's pretty strong herself. Oh, she is. He waved a hand. But I've always known that Natalie was in a category by herself. Anyhow, if you're worried about Miss Almira, you'll soon get the chance to ask after her yourself. Emory tells me that the girls are all planning a drive out here today. Levi stood up straight. Today? Yes. Colin grinned at him again. Maybe you'd like to come for dinner this afternoon. I'm sure Mandy would be glad to have you. You're a hero around these parts, you know. I'd be glad to join you. Levi managed to get out without stuttering, though his heart had no such luck. It seemed to be beating double time. Seeking to hide his discombobulation from Colin, he bent immediately to lift another railing into place. Judging by Colin's chuckle, though, he wasn't hiding anything. The rest of the morning passed swiftly, and by the time noon rolled around, it was blazing hot. As Levi walked back to his quarters, he heard the sound of a cart in the distance. Knowing that he was filthy and sweaty, mortified at the thought of Almira seeing him this way, he darted for the bunkhouse and slammed the door. For a long moment, he stood there, heart beating like a rabbit's. Then he shook his head. Ridiculous, Levi James, he said aloud. Running and hiding from a little girl like Almira Spencer. You'd think you were still a boy. Shaking his head at himself, he went to wash up, and despite his tough talk, he took extra care in making himself presentable. By the time he arrived at the ranch house, it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and dinner was ready. He approached the kitchen, where everyone seemed to be, with some shyness and hesitation. But Mandy spotted him right away, and practically leapt across to the door, despite her pregnancy bulk, and snatched him by the hand. Why, here he is, she proclaimed, dragging him after her as she waded back into the fray. Almira was just asking about you, Levi. Come and say hello. And there she was, and the two of them were face to face for the first time since the incident. She was even slighter than he remembered, but just as lovely, even prettier, he thought dazedly. She looked up at him with wide dark eyes, and she smiled and held out her hand. I've been wanting to see you, she said. Really? Yes, to thank you, of course. Oh. Of course. Still somewhat dazed, he reached out at last and took her hand. Her grip was warm and firm. I see that your bruises are healing nicely, she said, scrutinizing his face. He ducked his head a little. All in good order, he said. Hardly felt a thing. Then their eyes met, bright hazel green against sweet, dark brown, with more words flying fast and thick between them than could ever be said, at least, not in company. Really, she whispered. Levi couldn't bring himself to say yes, not now. The pain of the incident had long since passed into forgetfulness, but he would never be able to honestly say that he didn't feel anything, especially when Miss Almira Spencer looked at him like that. He was vaguely aware that there was a newcomer in the midst, a young blonde-headed girl who was introduced as Gina, Almira's friend from Tin City. He was also vaguely aware that Miss Crystal, Miss Natalie, and Mrs. Daphne were all quite congratulatory and made much of him. But more than anything, he was aware, sharply so, of Almira's sweet face, and the way her dark eyes remained fixed on his, and the silent words that seemed to be only for him. Thank you, I'll always be beholden. Chapter 6. Oh, brother dear. Emory glanced up from the barn door as he opened the latch. His expression was somewhere between a knowing smile and a grimace. Oh, no, he said. When you talk like that, I know you're about to ask me a favor. Almira tripped up to him and smiled. Nothing too terrible, I hope. You know I'll do whatever you need. What kind of big brother would I be, otherwise? I only need a ride into town with you. Today is the first day that I rehearse with Mrs. Hayes and the children from the Sunday school. Ah, well, I think we can handle that much of a favor. Come along and help me harness the horse. Almira did just as she was asked, her mind awhirl. There were so many things to think of. The play was only just over a week away, which meant that she had several rehearsals to attend. Gina was settling in well in Utah. The plan was to take her to York Ranch in South Meadows the next day, and Almira had to admit that she was rather looking forward to it. Not for any particular reason, of course, she told herself strictly. Certainly not because of any heroic ranch hand. "How are you feeling about working with Mrs. Hayes?" Emory asked her. "She can be a bit of a challenge, can't she?" "Well, I know about dealing with people who are a challenge. I grew up with you for an older brother, didn't I? Well, now, Miss Almira, I've half a mind to turn this cart around and take you right back home." She nudged him with her elbow, and they laughed. "Are you nervous about playing in front of the whole town?" "Whole town?" "Practically the whole county. Everyone is invited, and I know that the family will all be there, including York Ranch." "I suppose I'm more nervous about that than anything." "Why?" Emory asked gently. "They'll be there to support you, because they love you." "I know, it's just, well, it's still new to me, to have all of them. I love them dearly, but it's still difficult to believe they could feel the same way about me." "Listen, little sister," Emory said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Don't ever think that you're not worth being loved. I know John deeply hurt you, but I think I've heard you say it yourself. Don't let him hurt you any more than he already has." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know," she said softly. "It's just that with Gina here, it reminded me of everything he did, and everything he was capable of doing. I can't believe he's treated his own sister so cruelly. And I feel so sorry for her, that she has no parents to turn to, when I have so many family members who are willing to do everything they can to help me and protect me." "Well, she's got us now, too," Emory reminded her. "And she's lucky to have a good friend like you. Someday John's wickedness will catch up to him, and he'll be sorry. I only hope that we're all there to see it." "Oh, Emory, that sounds so vindictive." "I can't help it, I guess," Emory said, a bit grimly. "It's like those fellows who came after you in front of the saloon, and who hit Levi. Justice must be served, and I wish that I could be the one to dish it out." "Justice will be served," said Almira gently. "But you're too good of a man to waste your strength on thoughts of vengeance. I'm no worse off for what they did, and I promise, I'll try to put John out of my mind, too." The siblings were quiet for a moment, just listening to the clip-clop of the horses' hooves. "Besides, Mr. James was there to keep me safe, so really hardly anything happened at all." "That's right, good old Levi. You'd think he was an old friend, the way he stepped in, instead of someone who hardly knows us at all." He glanced sideways at her, with something like suspicion, and she felt a blush starting before he even spoke. "Incidentally, Almy, I heard from Natalie that you and he seem to get on quite well." "Of course, we do," she said, lifting her chin. "I get along well with everyone, don't I?" "I don't mean just that. Natalie seemed to think that he was staring at you quite a bit. And maybe he wasn't the only one." Said Almira, afraid to say anything much more than that. Her brother laughed. "I'm teasing you, you know that. But there would be nothing wrong with you and Mr. James coming to an understanding, if that's what you want. He's proven himself to be a good man, and Colin says he's a hard worker. He'll go far and is more than capable of providing for a wife and family." "Oh, Emory. Come on, now, little sister. I mean it. Don't tell me that you don't like him. I can tell that you do by the fact that you won't look at me, and the redness in your cheeks. So what would hold you back?" He waited, but she couldn't say anything. "John," he prompted, gently. Almira ducked her head. "Remember, Almira, don't let him hurt you any more than he already has." "I know," she whispered. With an effort, she pulled herself together and straightened up again. "I know it. I'll try. But I'm not saying that Mr. James and I have any sort of understanding." Even the words felt like a lie. And Emory seemed to know it, darn him. "I reckon," he said, "seeing as he saved you and all, you could call him by his Christian name. He hasn't invited me to do so. It's impolite to presume." "If Levi James doesn't call you by your first name in his head," said Emory, "then I'll eat my hat." "Oh, Emory, you're ridiculous." She shook her head, fighting the urge to laugh. Her brother could always get her into a better mood. Besides, you're not even wearing a hat. Well, I'll remember when we get back to the ranch. Just you remember, little sister, John Elwood was a fool, and he is of no consequence to you now. Don't let him stand in the way of the happiness you deserve. Impulsively, she linked her arm through his and kissed him on the cheek. I won't, she said. I promise. As they rode on through the golden sunlight of the late summer afternoon, she found herself believing her own words for the very first time. Chapter 7. Oh, Levi. He heard his name float on the breeze that blew toward him across the homeward field and glanced up from his work on the fence. Finally, he was reaching the end of this particular project, and he had to admit he was looking forward to doing something else for a change. To his surprise, it was Mandy's voice he heard. She was coming toward him, walking with that peculiar, rolling gait that women in the advanced stages of pregnancy often have. He put down his hatchet, which he had been using to trim and sharpen the ends of the railings, and headed toward her at a trot, to savor some of the journey. She was flushed and red when he reached her, but she was smiling. I'm sorry, Levi, but I wondered if you could help me. Andrew and Colin rode into South Meadows to see about a buyer for some of the horses, and Natalie and the rest arrived earlier than I thought. Would you help bring Gina's things into the house? They're bringing her today. Now, in fact. They've just arrived. Goodness, I didn't think we were expecting them for a few days yet. His heart leapt into his throat, but he told himself sternly to calm down. He didn't even know for certain that Almira was with them, and he certainly wasn't about to ask. Instead, he headed back toward the ranch, keeping a slower pace alongside Mandy, though he halfway longed to break into a run. He hadn't heard the buggy pull up into the front yard. He must have been too far away. But there they were, Crystal, Natalie, Gina, and Almira. He found that his eyes were fixed on her immediately, and fought to drag them away, deliberately saluting all of them as a whole. Good morning. How was the drive from Pepper Gulch? It was gorgeous, said Gina, who seemed to have regained some pep since he had seen her last. She clasped her hands, looking all around her in wonder. This is so different from Tin City. I just can't really fathom that I'm going to live here, such wide open spaces and rolling hills. Despite his best intentions, Levi felt his gaze slip sideways and fix on Almira's face again. She was smiling in a proud, happy manner at her young friend. And we're glad to have you, said Mandy, reaching for her to give her an embrace. I reckon we'll be putting you to work before too long. I'm getting so big, I can hardly do the dishes, let alone anything else. She glanced over at Levi. She just has the one trunk, I believe, Levi. Thank you so much. No problem at all, Miss Mandy. He went around to the back of the cart as the women started for the door, but realized as he turned to look, that Almira was hesitating, hovering behind, almost as though she wanted to speak with him. She saw him looking and broke into a smile, stepping forward deliberately to stand closer to him as he reached for the trunk. May I help you with that? You could hold the door open for me, maybe. Thank you kindly. Oh, you're welcome. You're so helpful, I can't tell you how grateful we are. She stepped ahead of him and did as he asked, letting him move past her into the hall. And, you're feeling all right? Everything has healed up after the incident? He tossed a grin over his shoulder at her. All present and correct, he said. Bruises are gone and all. Besides, it's far more important how you are after the incident. Oh. She blushed. I'm just fine, really. Everyone made such a fuss over me, but it was you who actually got hurt. It was a frightening thing to happen. My friend Riley Johnson is certain that he'll be bringing those two in any day now. I'm sure he's working very hard. She paused at the foot of the stairs, watching him as he started to carry the trunk up. Well, she started. Levi turned around to face her, and once again their eyes met with that mysterious jolt. Thank you, she whispered, and turned and fled. Levi held his breath as he climbed the steps, willing his heart to stop beating so quickly. He set the trunk down in the spare room and then headed back down again, debating with himself over whether he should poke his head in at the kitchen and bid them farewell. He could hear them all chattering joyfully, always happy to be together. It made him smile. On impulse, before he could stop himself, he stepped through the doorway and called out to Mandy. "Anything else I can help you with before I head back out to the field?" "Oh, I don't think so, Levi. Thank you." "Thank you, Mr. James," said Gina, who was now looking around herself at the kitchen and seeming just as enthused about it as she was about the landscape outside. "Will we see you at the play on Friday?" Levi glanced at Mandy. At least, he intended to, but his gaze was momentarily sidetracked by the lure of Almira Spencer. Finally, he got it under control and received a nod from his employer's wife. "I guess so," he said. "I don't know that I've heard much about it." "Oh, it's a yearly thing," Natalie told him. "And this year is special, because our own Almira is going to play accompaniment on the piano." She smiled broadly at her sister-in-law, who blushed. "It's nothing special, really." "Of course, it is something. It's only that I wanted to contribute," Almira said to Levi, as though she had to explain her reasonings to him, "and we thought if I volunteered to help Mrs. Hayes, she could see how well I could do with the children in the Sunday school." Another blush. "Not that I think I'll do so well, I don't mean that." Her confusion and continued blushing were the most enchanting things he'd ever seen. "I think it's very special indeed," he said firmly, "and I look forward to seeing you perform." "And, of course, all of you must stay at least one night," said Crystal. "It will be far too late to go home after the play is over, and we can manage to put you all up. Besides, it'll be lovely to have the company for a few days. Ernest is hard at work on a project he can certainly use help on, and Lena, Daphne, and I would love the chance to spoil Mandy before the happy day." She smiled at her sister, who smiled back. "We'd be honored and delighted to have you stay as well, Levi." Levi hesitated, but out of the corner of his eye he realized that every single woman in the room was nodding enthusiastically. "Well," he said, "who am I to say no to a request like that?" As he made his goodbyes and headed back out to the field, he felt as though his head was going to float away. Almira was going to play the piano, and he was going to see it. He was going to spend a few days in company with her, under the very same roof. It was enough to make his head spin. The one thing he was quite sure of, as he bent to pick up his hatchet again, was that he needed to get hold of some flowers, somewhere. Chapter 8. Almira held her breath and peeked out from behind the curtain. The audience was, well, the audience was everyone she knew, and more, far more. When Mrs. Hayes told her that she was inviting the entire county, she hadn't been exaggerating. She gulped. In a matter of moments, she would be walking out there to take her place to the right, sitting behind the piano. She was grateful, at least, that she would be somewhat hidden throughout, but everyone would be hearing every note she played, and every note that she misplayed. She stepped back, let the curtain fall, and squeezed her eyes shut, doubting the decisions that had led her to this moment in the first place. "Almira?" Lena Flynn, Ernest's eldest by his first marriage, came up to her. She was dressed in her costume as a plainswoman. The simple checked gingham dress was so similar to the clothing Almira remembered wearing as a little girl that she couldn't help but smile. "Are you all right?" Almira smiled at the girl. She was tall and serious-eyed, much like her father, and on the quiet side. It was amazing, really, that she had agreed to be in the play. "Yes, dear, but to tell you the truth," she glanced one way, and then the other, and lowered her voice. "I'm a little nervous." Lena smiled back. "Me too," she whispered. Almira took her hand and squeezed it. "But do you know what? We're both going to do just fine." Lena nodded. "Yes," she said. "I believe we are. Are you ready, Almira?" The strident tones that belonged to Mrs. Hayes were not able to be completely hushed by the fact that she was attempting to speak in a whisper. Almira couldn't help but smile. She winked at Lena. "Yes," she said, fighting for calm. "Is it time?" Mrs. Hayes nodded. "It's time." Not letting herself think about it for another moment, Almira turned and slipped through the curtain. She focused her eyes firmly on the piano over to the side and began to walk across to it. To her surprise, she heard a few scattered claps begin out in the audience. Swiftly she darted a glance in that direction, and the first familiar face she saw was that of Levi James. He was sitting in the same row as her family, who were also applauding by now, but she could tell by the expression on his face, pride, and an intense kind of interest that made her stomach do flip-flops, that he was the one who had started the applause. She tore her gaze away from him and made it at last to her seat at the piano. Lifting her trembling hands, she breathed a swift and silent prayer, and struck the first chord. The play went by in a dizzying blur. The children clearly enjoyed it thoroughly. Any chance to dress up and play pretend was a delight. There were a few scattered forgotten lines, a few harsh whispers from Mrs. Hayes to settle a scuffle or two backstage. But the notes that Almira struck were sweet and pure, and as she let her fingers dance along the keys, she couldn't help but smile. She'd played ever since she was a child, but she'd given it up for the most part after she'd met John. He didn't approve of or appreciate it. Now that she was experiencing the joy of playing again, she could hardly believe she had let him keep her from it. The next thing she knew, the play was completed, the children were taking their bows and curtsies, and there was someone in the crowd shouting her name. Almira. Almira. A few more picked it up, and she heard it from one section of the hall, then another. Blushing furiously, she stood up from her seat at the piano and curtsied deeply. She caught sight of her brother and his wife, and all of the extended York/Flynn family, hooting, hollering, and applauding like mad. Her heart seemed as though it would burst from pride and love. When all the hubbub had at last receded, she made her way to meet her family. Lena, still dressed in her costume, rushed forward and flung her arms around her. "We did it. We sure did." Almira hugged the little girl fiercely. At almost 11, Lena was nearly as tall as Almira was herself. Her father Ernest put a hand on Almira's shoulder, and pulled his daughter into a one-armed embrace. "I sure thank you," he said, voice low. Almira was about to ask what he meant, but the others had piped up with questions and compliments. Crystal pulled her to the side and hugged her. "What did Ernest mean by thanking me?" Almira asked her. "He sounded so serious about it." "It's Lena," Crystal explained. "I don't know if you're aware, but for a long time after her mother died, she didn't speak at all. It was only after Ernest and I were married that she really started to come out of her shell, and it's been a long time in coming. Ernest believes that Lena would never have had the courage to participate tonight if it weren't for the fact that you were there with her, and I agree with him." She smiled at her once more and turned to hug her stepdaughter. Almira's heart grew warm, and she just stood and smiled joyfully at the happy throng. When she glanced toward the stage once more, she was surprised to find Levi James standing quietly a few feet away, waiting. He stepped forward and held out what was in his hands, a bouquet of daisies and Queen Anne's lace, with ferns interspersed here and there. "You were wonderful," he said. "Congratulations, Miss Almira." Almira took the bouquet from him, scarcely aware of what she was doing. She smiled up at him. "Call me Almira," she said. Levi James grinned at her. "If you'll call me Levi." "I will," she said, and it sounded like a promise. It took 2 cartloads to bring them all back to the Flynn ranch for the evening, and it was well past 10 o'clock by the time they got there. The younger children were an unholy mix of grumpy and wild, and Lena was doing her best to calm and down, while Crystal soothed Simon on her shoulder. There was a happy, chaotic bustle of sorting everyone out and sending them hither and thither to sleep, and as the grown-ups sat down for a final cup of tea before bedtime, Almira could not suppress her yawn. "You did wonderfully tonight, Almy," said Emory, smiling over at her. "Thank you, dear brother. I hope that Mrs. Hayes thought so as well." "Of course. How could she not? You brought down the house." "Mrs. Hayes isn't exactly the sort to appreciate the house being brought down," observed Crystal. "But if she doesn't realize how valuable Almira is to her, then she's a fool," said Natalie. "Now, Natalie," said her brother. "I mean it, Colin. Almira could be a pianist with the orchestra back east, if she wanted. The least she deserves is the chance to work with the Sunday school class." "I'm not sure that's how Mrs. Hayes' mind works," said Almira, sensing that the two York siblings, occasionally contentious, were headed for a dust-up. "But I suppose I'll find out tomorrow when I go and speak to her. She asked me to come for tea. Would anyone be willing to drive me in the afternoon?" Colin and Emory glanced at each other, but surprisingly did not say a thing. A few seconds passed, and Almira felt herself getting hot in the face. Then Levi James spoke up from where he sat in the corner. "I'd be glad to accompany you into town," he said. He smiled at them all. "Remember what happened the last time we let Almira wander off on her own?" Almira caught the triumphant glance that Emory shot her and cringed inwardly. He was obviously holding back an "I told you so," and probably also a "now I don't have to eat my hat." With as much dignity as she could muster, she said, "Thank you, Levi. I'd be grateful." And, of course, that was all she could think of for the rest of the night. Chapter 9. The next morning came eventually, as mornings tend to do, and she made her way through her usual chores and responsibilities in something of a daydream. Breakfast, playing with the children, piano lessons with Lena, and then it was time for lunch. She'd hardly sat down before lunch was over, and tea time was approaching at a rapid pace. Levi came in from helping Ernest and Emory in the barn. He must have gone to change and wash up first, for his light brown hair was darkened with water and slicked back, and he looked as spiffed up and shiny as though he were going to be married. The very thought triggered a blush on her cheeks, and she hurried past him and headed up the stairs with no more than "I'll be just a moment, Levi, thank you." Gina slipped into her room as she washed up and gathered her shawl and smiled at her shyly. "I'll tell you what," she said, "if that Levi James doesn't ask you to court him today, you'll eat your hat?" Gina looked rather bemused. "I'm sorry?" Almira sighed. "No, I'm sorry, Gina. I've had a conversation much like this with my brother, that's all." "Is it really so obvious to everyone?" Gina nodded. "I've only been here for a few weeks," Gina said. "And it's odd, because it isn't as though you two talk frequently, but whenever you're together, it's as though you're speaking constantly, without using any words. I've never seen anything like it." "No?" She shook her head. "And I remember what it was like with you and John, nothing like this. This is different, Almira. This is important. Better." The thought of John was bitter and dark, but Almira knew that Gina only meant well in comparing him to Levi. She put a hand on her friend's shoulder. "Thank you," she said. "I'd better run, now, or he'll never offer to drive me into town again." "Oh," said Gina airily, "I think he will, no matter what you do." And so it was that Almira Spencer found herself sitting next to Levi James in the driver's box of the York ranch cart, both of them eyeing each other sideways and fighting smiles. "Thank you so much for being willing to take me in today. Anytime I can help you out, Almira, I'm glad to do it." "You're very kind." "Not at all. It's my pleasure." She glanced at him and held her breath for a moment before the words emerged, tumbling over themselves swiftly. "I believe you mean that." He looked surprised. "Of course, I do. Why wouldn't I?" "Well, it's just, we knew each other before. We've spoken on occasion. But it wasn't until the incident happened that we really started to become friends." Levi nodded. "I guess you're right, at that. It brought us together, so to speak." "Yes." She was relieved that he seemed to understand her so clearly and felt emboldened to press on. "I am grateful for what you've done, of course, but I feel somehow as though it's more than that. It's almost as though our friendship was there all along, and we had to go through a door in order to find it. And the incident was the door. Somehow, I'm afraid I'm not making a great deal of sense." "You're making perfect sense," said Levi. "I know exactly what you mean." Almira was certain she had never been so heart-grateful in her entire life. "I'm so glad to hear it. It makes it much easier to know that we understand each other. To be honest, I rarely have a friendship with a man. I've always been very close with my older brother, of course." "Why not?" said Levi. "You've got good, strong men surrounding you, Colin York, Ernest Flynn. They'd do anything to protect and help you." "I know it." I suppose it's about trust. You don't trust them? Not that, exactly, she hesitated, darting him another sideways glance, but he was looking out in front of them at the road. I expect you know about my past, just before I came to Pepper Gulch. Can't say I do. I thought everyone must surely know about it. Not me, he said. I'm new around here. Well, so am I, but I guess I'm glad to know that it isn't being talked about. She looked down at her hands in her lap. It's certainly not the most flattering thing that anyone could know about me. It's embarrassing, really, as well as being rather tragic. I won't ask, but if you want to talk about it. He left it there, an open, gentle invitation. She heaved a sigh and launched into it. The story of John Elwood and how he had first stolen her heart and then broken it did not take much time to tell. In fact, putting it into as few sentences as possible, she was rather surprised that that was all there was to it. When she reached the end, he nodded and looked thoughtful. And Miss Gina is his little sister? Yes. She came to me because her mother had died, and John had arranged a marriage for her that was entirely unsuitable, but which he thought would be to his advantage. You're very kind. Miss Gina is lucky to have a friend like you. That's what my brother says, she said softly. Well, Emory's a very smart man. He was quiet for a moment. Do you reckon that's the last you'll ever hear of him? Elwood, I mean. John. Oh, I hope so. Her voice was fervent. I very much hope so. Me, too. Another few moments of quiet passed, but it was a comfortable, companionable silence. Then, as quickly as though the words had to be forced out so as not to come to a complete stop and get tangled up in his mouth, he said, I'll tell you a story of my own, since you told me yours. Years ago, I was engaged to be married to a sweet woman, a childhood friend, named Diana. And last week was the 3rd anniversary of her death. After her initial gasp of surprise and dismay, Almira stayed quiet and let him speak. He told her the entire story of his love and how he had lost her, and how he had feared ever since that his heart would never recover. So, you see, Almira, I know a little bit about losing trust, too. I understand it because I've seen it in myself. And I think it's not so much about trust, it's about faith. Faith? He nodded. The readiness, the willingness, to believe, in something better than what we've had. It's a difficult thing, but the older I get, the more I start to see how important it is to have faith. He looked over at her with a gentle smile. Faith that things will get better. No matter what. Their eyes met, and more words didn't need to be spoken. They were in the outskirts of Pepper Gulch now, and she could scarcely believe how quickly the ride had gone. More than ever, she was grateful to have had this time to discuss things with Levi, and grateful to know that he understood. Whatever this strange thing was between them, it was good and healthy and becoming stronger by the day. As they drove slowly through the streets, she felt the hair on the back of her neck prickle and darted a glance around them. What is it, Almira? I don't know, I had a feeling, almost as though I was being watched. Huh. He shook his head and chuckled. A goose walking over your grave. Maybe those 2 men are back in town, and I saw them and didn't even realize it. How would you not realize it? She smiled at him. Oh, perhaps I was distracted. He grinned back. Well, one of these days, Deputy Johnson and I will be calling you in to see them in jail. It'll be a little bit of revenge for you, just to know that they're locked up. It wasn't so bad, really, they only talked to me. You were the only one who got hurt. And besides, she added, quietly, if it hadn't happened, would we be sitting here together and talking like this now? I guess not, said Levi. Maybe I ought to hunt those 2 down just to thank them. She laughed. Well, I don't know that I'd go that far. Before she knew it, they were pulling up in front of the neat little white house that belonged to Pastor Hayes and his wife. She looked at the front door, looked back at Levi, and felt a strong reluctance to leave him behind. He nodded at the house. Go on with you, he said. Go get your position. I've got no problem sitting here and waiting for you as long as it takes. Almost before she realized it, she blurted out, "Will you come in with me?" Evidently, Levi was just as surprised by her question as she herself had been. "I don't know," he said. "It's rather unusual, isn't it?" Almira bit her lip. "It's tea with the pastor's wife to discuss a position," she said. "It isn't as though we're courting and asking for their blessing." He nodded. "You're right," he said. "It's not like that at all." He looked thoughtful for a moment, and then nodded. "All right," he said. "I'll do it." Almira fought briefly against a smile, and then decided to lose. Chapter 10. The next day, the first day of September, dawned bright and glorious. Almira felt rather bright and glorious herself as she went down to help fix breakfast. There was a festive, almost holiday-like atmosphere about the house, with the visitors here and there, slowly waking up or chatting with each other or searching for coffee. "I hear the boys are all going to go and help Ernest with that far-off herd," Mandy was telling her sister as Almira entered the kitchen. Crystal chuckled. "That's good. There's no better time for you all to be visiting than right about now. He's been wanting to get that handled for weeks now, and I've been hearing about it non-stop." "Are all of them going to be gone?" Almira rolled up her sleeves and joined Daphne in kneading the mounds of bread dough. "I reckon so," said Crystal. "He'll need all the help he can get. It's just a shame that Andrew and Melissa didn't decide to stay over as well." She looked around the kitchen speculatively. "Though I'm not sure where we would have put them." "Oh, you would have thought of something," said Mandy cheerfully. "You always do," Natalie put in, coming in from the outside door with Anne in her arms. She put her little one down and watched her race off in search of Lena with a satisfied expression. "Now, the real question is, with the menfolk gone all day, what sort of rumpus can we get up to?" Joking suggestions were tossed back and forth all through the rest of breakfast preparation, and they had just about settled on either dressing little Simon up like a prince, Crystal's suggestion, or storming the government and demanding that train tracks be laid between Pepper Gulch and South Meadows, Natalie's contribution, when the menfolk came in, some of them still rubbing sleep from their eyes, and sat down for breakfast. Almira caught Levi's gaze more than once and kept having to try to hide her smile, rather unsuccessfully. Surely everyone must realize by now that there was something going on between them, even if no one knew exactly what to call it. Breakfast over, the dishes done, and the men on their way to the north field carrying their dinner pails and whistling, the women of the York and Flynn household sat down to tea, sewing, and discussion, which was what they had all been planning to do all along. The day spun along brightly, with plenty of laughter and chatter. Almira felt something she had not felt for some time, not just happiness, but contentment. She knew that there was something good about to start, she was sure of it. And contrary to all expectation, she was no longer nervous about the prospect. Though she hadn't known Levi long, she trusted him. She trusted him with her heart. It was nearing 3 o'clock in the afternoon, nearly time to go and start getting supper ready for the men's return, when Mandy suddenly went very still and pale. Daphne noticed first. She dropped her sewing and reached out to her son's sister-in-law, her face immediately drawn with worry. "What is it?" Mandy put a hand on her stomach. "I'm feeling very odd." "The baby." Crystal leapt from her seat, and a hubbub started more swiftly than anyone would have expected, with everyone having something to say, all the way down to little Anne and Simon. Daphne alone retained her composure. She helped Mandy to stand up and started to shepherd her from the room. "We'll just go upstairs and have a little lie down. It could be a false alarm." "Oh, I don't think so," cried Mandy. Shoo, dear, nothing to worry about at all." "But the doctor is still gone from town." "No need for a doctor, I've delivered my fair share of little ones, and every single one of them was as healthy as can be." The older woman darted a glance back at Crystal, Natalie, Almira, and Gina, with an instruction for each of them. "Hot water, please, and towels, Natalie. Crystal, I expect she'll want you with her the whole time. Please come with us upstairs. Almira and Gina, Lena will help you to watch the little ones. This could be some time." "But Colin's not here," wailed Mandy. "What if the baby comes before he gets back?" Daphne chuckled. "It's not likely, dear. But what if? I can go and find him, offered Almira. I'll take one of the horses, I know how to ride. Daphne nodded at her. Thank you, dear, I believe it would help to set Mandy's mind at ease. Almira nodded, and darted toward the front door. Her heart was pounding a mile a minute, as though it were her own family that was going into labor, and, she realized, in a way, it was. Mandy was her brother's wife's sister-in-law. It was complicated, but there was more to it than that, anyhow. It was more than just a relation by blood, or by marriage. Everyone at York Ranch and Flynn Ranch was near and dear to her, just as important as her parents back in Tin City. Driven by the thought, she rushed into the barn and to the wall of tack. She had spoken rather hastily, she did know how to ride, but only just, and she certainly didn't like doing it. It was almost as frightening to her as driving herself in the cart. But if it would help Mandy, then she would do it. Besides, Colin would be delighted to make it back in time to be there by his wife's side. Occupied with her thoughts, she brought the saddle over to the stall and set it across the half door, turning to go back for the bit and bridle when someone grabbed her hand. She shrieked, but a hand was clapped over her mouth, and she knew with a cold, dead certainty that the hard object that she felt in the small of her back was the muzzle of a pistol. Hello, Almira. Did you miss me? Her blood ran cold. She hadn't expected to hear that voice ever again. He let his grip loosen a little, just enough for her to speak. John. Chapter 11. The sun was setting as Levi walked back to the Flynn Ranch house alongside Ernest, Emory, and Colin. It had been a successful day. He felt as though he had learned a lot and was grateful that Colin had made sure he was invited to stay with the Flynns. Ernest was by far the most experienced among them, and he was an easygoing, laid-back teacher, willing to demonstrate what needed to be done and never condescending when he needed to give correction. When at last they arrived at the ranch house, it was easy to tell that something was amiss. For one thing, there was no supper prepared. Lena was in the midst of setting out cornbread, and she greeted them with a shy smile. Lena, Ernest said, reaching for his daughter, what's going on? Where's your mother? Upstairs with Mandy, said Lena, and she glanced sideways at Colin. Men other than her father always made her rather shy, so she leaned forward and whispered to Ernest, who broke into a smile and turned to Colin. You'd better head upstairs quick. Why? Colin asked, alarmed. What's happening? Is Mandy all right? Your wife is 9 months pregnant, Colin. What do you think is happening? Colin gaped at him for a moment, and then made a headlong rush for the stairs. The other men chuckled, and Ernest hugged Lena. It sounds like you've been a rock in the house today, he said. And here you are setting out supper. It's only cornbread. Well, all cornbread needs is a little beans, maybe some leftover chicken, and we've got the makings of a fine meal. Where are the others? Emory asked. All upstairs? Crystal has been with Mandy the whole time, Lena ventured. And Grandma is helping, of course. Natalie and Gina are in the sitting room with Anne and Simon. She turned a suddenly concerned look on her father. But Almira went to fetch you, where is she? Ernest exchanged glances with Emory. Levi felt his heart clench. She never came to us, Emory said. When did she leave? About 3 o'clock, when Mandy started to feel funny. She said she would saddle up a horse and ride to fetch you. Levi's eyes darted to the clock immediately. It was just after 5. It's been more than 2 hours, said Emory heavily. Even if she had to ride around looking for us, she would have found us by now easily. The barn, said Levi, and he broke into a run. He was vaguely aware that the other 2 men were following him, but he couldn't wait or slow down. He made it to the barn well ahead of them and had just finished frantically searching through it when they returned. All quiet, he panted. No sign of her, or anyone. Emory looked at him curiously. Anyone? Levi pointed to the stall, where the saddle waited to be placed on the horse. Someone interrupted her, he said. Maybe she decided to go on foot, said Ernest. Levi shook his head. No, she would have been rushing. She always wants to be of help to others, and your family is important to her. He was aware of the surprised look that Emory was giving him, but he didn't care. Someone came and took her, and I fear I know who it is. He met Emory's gaze, which hardened with his own realization. John Elwood, he said slowly. Levi blanched. She told me about him, about what happened. And now his sister is here. He must have figured it out and followed her. Do you suppose he came to take one or both of them back with him, and Almira is the first one he found? He can't do something like that, said Ernest. He'll never get away with it. That depends on what he wants to get away with, said Emory grimly. I wouldn't put anything past that snake. But that doesn't matter now, all that matters is where they are. He put a hand to his head. We'll have to split up and go search for her. I can go into town, fetch the deputy, offered Levi swiftly. He'll be at home this time of the evening, but I know where he lives. He's a friend of mine. Emory nodded. Thank you. He turned to Ernest. Will you tell Colin what's going on? Don't let on to Natalie or the other girls. The last thing they need in the middle of everything else is to be worried about this. Natalie will have a fit when she finds out that you kept it from her. I know. On my own head be it. I'll handle my wife later, it's my sister that I'm worried about now. He turned back to Levi, who had already placed the saddle on the horse and was preparing to swing into it. Be careful, he told him. John Elwood can be a dangerous man. Levi gritted his teeth. So can I, he said, and rode out. Chapter 12. John Elwood, 26, was boyishly handsome. His features were clean and neat, his figure tall and stalwart, and his mustache impeccable. Looking at him, no one would have ever thought that he was the type to break a girl's heart, run off with another woman, and then come back to commit kidnapping with a plan for ransom. But no one knew John Elwood quite like Almira Spencer. In the squalid little room above the saloon, he had given her the only chair, a courtesy that was lost in the sea of maltreatment. Now, apparently unheeding to the calls of dignity, he sat down on the floor in front of her, cross-legged like an Indian. He fixed her with a keen gaze, and swept it over her inch by inch, as though needing to take in every detail. She squirmed underneath his gaze, but the ropes he had tied her with were too tight to allow her much movement. Finally, he huffed out a breath, and shook his head. Sometimes, Almira, he said, I wonder if I didn't make the wrong decision. Jane is sweet. It's true. And she comes from a wealthy family, which is more important still. But we've been married for 3 months now, and Almira, he got onto his knees, moving forward to kneel just in front of her, looking up into her eyes. She never looks at me the way you used to look at me. As though you worshipped me. As though you would do anything for me. Almira closed her eyes and turned her head away. That was a long time ago, she muttered. I was a fool, but not as foolish as you. Don't tell me you regret what you did. I don't, said John Elwood frankly. I only wonder what it is that I'm going to do next. He sat back on his heels and folded his arms, looking her over once more. The truth is, I came here because of Gina. She's my little sister, after all, and she's valuable to me, though you might not think it to look at her. Almira had to open her eyes just to glare at him. How can you speak about her that way, she said. Gina is one of the sweetest, dearest. Elwood waved her words away. Oh, I know. That's part of her value, in fact. My colleague Mr. Nathaniel is quite interested in someone who is sweet and dear, and young, too. Poor man has buried 2 wives already, but can I expect you or my sister to show him any sympathy? He huffed, as though this were a ridiculous suggestion. Obviously not. It isn't right to use your poor sister like that. You're meant to be her protector. Just like Emory has always been mine. Emory, your brother, Emory? Elwood grinned. I don't see him protecting you now. I don't see him protecting you from me. He leaned toward her again, and she fought the urge to shrink back against the chair. She had promised that he would not hurt her anymore, and she wasn't about to let him frighten her either. She kept her eyes wide open, fixed on him in a glare like a dagger. He reached out and traced a finger along her cheek, a pale ghost of the affection she used to crave from him. No? He questioned softly. Why ever not? Don't tell me it has anything to do with that rube I saw you in the cart with yesterday. She clamped her mouth shut firmly, not giving him the satisfaction of a retort. He sighed. Well, I guess I'll have to go with my original plan, then. When Gina realizes that I've got you in my clutches, he clenched his hands in the air theatrically. Then she'll readily agree to come back with me and marry poor Mr. Nathaniel. We only want what's best for her, after all, a steady home life, a husbandly protector, since her brother is doing such a poor job of it. His voice was gibing, and she wondered how she could ever have thought him gentle or worthy of her love. I'll send them a note, I doubt it'll take more than that. Then I'll be on my way. It will never work. Gina won't agree. No? But my sister is the sweetest, dearest, I think she'd do just about anything for her closest, indeed, her only friend in the world. And Emory, Ernest, Colin, Levi, they'll never let you get away with it. They'll track you down no matter where you go. Once Gina is married, do you think that matters a whit to me? He shrugged. This isn't some long-term plan, my dear. I'll have Gina back in Tin City and married off to Mr. Nathaniel within a week. Less, if the weather holds out on the train journey. He smiled. And it's only September, I have no cause for fear. Are you sure about that? She whispered. He bent closer to her. Quite sure, he said. His hand once more cupped her cheek, in a horrible parody of the love he had once shown her. Almira clenched her teeth, and lashed out with one foot, catching him in the ribs. He tumbled backwards, swearing loudly. Almira threw her head back and screamed for help as loudly as she could. He was back at her side more quickly than she could have imagined, and this time he had the pistol out, pressed against her throat. Thank you, he gritted out. Thank you for answering the question for me and laying my doubts to rest. I made the right decision in leaving you in the dust and marrying little Jane, mealy-mouthed and pointless as she is. Marriage isn't about love, is it, my dear? Marriage is about getting ahead. He leaned even closer. And you had nothing to offer me. Let me go. The door flew open with such force that it crashed into the wall behind it and stuck by the knob. A strong voice said, "You heard the lady. She said to let her go." She'd heard that voice before. She'd heard those words before. Blinking back sudden tears of relief, she looked beyond the looming face of John Elwood to see Levi James, standing in the door, hands and fists at his sides. "Aha," said Elwood. "The rube arrives." He stood up, scarcely a step away from Almira, and turned the pistol on Levi. "The only trouble is," he said, "you seem to have brought only your fists to a shootout." Levi's gaze slipped past him to meet Almira's. No words were spoken, none needed to be said. "I have a feeling," said Levi, "that it'll sort itself out." Once again, Almira lashed her foot out against Elwood. It caught him in the back of the knee this time, and he went down with a terrible shout. Levi rushed forward, kicking the pistol away from him, and stomped heavily on his hand as Elwood reached for it. Elwood howled and grasped Levi around the ankle with his other hand, pulling so sharply that Levi went down backward with a crash. Then the two men were fighting, first one with the upper hand, then the other, and Almira shrieked and struggled against her bonds, trying her best to get loose and help. A shot rang out, and the two men fell apart. Deputy Johnson stood in the doorway, breathing heavily as though he'd come up the stairs at a run. He held his smoking pistol trained on Elwood. Levi shook his head and got unsteadily to his feet. "About time you showed up. Your message wasn't exactly clear," said the deputy. "Almira is missing, meet me at the saloon doesn't exactly smack of urgency, you know. I didn't have much time. I only thought of it on the way into town." "Well, it all came out in the wash, didn't it?" The deputy came forward and put Elwood in handcuffs before dragging him to his feet. Elwood went without a backward glance at Almira, head down. She watched him go, as Levi undid her bonds and helped her up. "That man," said Almira, "simply refuses to be decent." "Oh, Almira, I'm so glad you're all right." Levi flung his arms around her, pulling her close, and she held on to him tightly, rejoicing in the feeling of his embrace. For a long moment they stood there, silent in the room, and then he gave a strange, heavy sigh, pulled back a few inches, and kissed her. It was the kind of kiss she had been dreaming of, without being able to admit it even to herself. It was the kind of conversation that needed no words. Finally, though, he let her go and they looked at each other. She smiled through her tears. "I feel as though we've finally made it all the way through the door," she said. "The one we talked about on our wagon ride the other day." Levi James looked her in the eyes and said, "I know exactly what you mean." The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.